Hello, I'm James. We're going to take it back a few hundred years and look at popular music enjoyed by the who's who of the Holy Roman Empire and anyone fortunate to pay their way into watching them eat.
Do I have something in my teeth?
Yeah, Emperor Leopold I. Yeah, you can pretty much see what he's got in his teeth. Early in the 17th century, there emerged a genre that defined the stylistic traits of the Baroque era and proved to be a major bop for that era: the trio sonata. The trio sonata is a genre typically consisting of 3 or 4 movements with 2 contrasting melody instruments and continuo. The word sonata is from sonare, to sound or to play. This is in contrast to cantare, which means to sing, establishing the sonata as an instrumental genre. Sorry, vocal peeps, not your bag. The word trio refers not to the number of instruments in the music, but to the number of contrapuntal threads. It's like a trick question or a trap that you may fall into if you think of it as being 3 voices.
It's a trap!
The most common voicing is 2 upper lines of equal status, 2 violins, say, or 2 recorders, and a bass line, typically played by a cello or a viola da gamba. This bottom line, however, is a basso continuo, meaning that 1 or more chordal instruments, such as a harpsichord or theorbo, are added to it to provide semi-improvised fill-in harmonies. Sonatas could be placed into 2 categories: sonata da camera, which means chamber sonata, and sonata da chiesa, or church sonata. The chamber sonata was considered a group of stylized dances, and church sonatas were much more serious and typically arranged into slow, fast sequences. The way I remember it is that it's not proper to dance at church, so dance in your chambers. Virtuistic instrumentalists, especially on violin, in the 17th century shaped the direction of the genre. Thus, we get more and more standardized string trio sonatas as the century moves on, until the king of trio sonata, Corelli, wrote the 4 sets of Sonata a Tre, published between 1681 and 1694. These sets became the classic models for the next 7 decades, inspiring composers such as Couperin, Purcell, Vivaldi, Bach, Handel, Telemann, and others, all of whom conformed to it while finding plenty of room for their own personalities. Arcangelo Corelli was an Italian composer and violinist born in 1653. Even though he didn't write much music in comparison to other composers, his collections of instrumental music was focused and intensely restricted to 3 genres: solo sonata, trio sonata, and concerto, making him a specialist in these areas. Corelli exercised an unparalleled influence during his lifetime and for a long time afterwards. He is the first composer to become famous exclusively from instrumental composition, the first to owe his reputation in large part to the activity of music publishers, and the first to produce instrumental works which were admired and studied long after his death. Corelli served as a chamber musician under Queen Christina of Sweden and composed sonatas for her first academy. In 1681, Corelli dedicated his first opus 12 sonata trios of the church variety to Queen Christina, describing them as the first fruits of his studies. He wasn't boastful at all. Such an humble man. In 1689, while in Rome, Corelli dedicated his third opus 12, More Sonata da Chiesa, to Francesco II, Duke of Modena. He admitted in a letter that the sole purpose of his composition was to show off the violin and virtuistic playing. In formal matters, Corelli is often credited with the clearest exposition of the difference between the church and chamber varieties of sonata, and the establishment of 4 movements as the norm in both. After 1708, Corelli retired from public view. Corelli died in 1713 and was buried in Santa Maria della Rotonda, or the Pantheon, which is actually a famous landmark in Roman architecture and burial ground for many important people, fitting for such a man of humble stature. We talk about Corelli because of his importance in normalizing the sonata trio genre. Sonata development was actually a nearly 100-year evolution between 1650 and 1750. The canzone of the early 17th century evolved into the sonata as the individual sections grew in length and were reduced in number, until by Corelli's time they had achieved the status of separate movements. Some scholars say that there were multi-movement designs that were evolving from canzone in other ways, and is related to the mid-century repertoire in which many sonatas do consist primarily of tonally closed, if brief, movements. By 1650, composers such as Merula, Cazzetti, and Legrenzi favored 3 and 4 movement structures. Although they shared no single pattern, and individual movements are not always tonally closed. Just like in all music, we beg, borrow, and steal ideas. Corelli may have adopted the slow introduction, rare before the 1680s, strict fugal movements, and triple meter finales from his Roman colleagues. Despite the many references to Corelli sonatas as normative, the 4-movement model, usually attributed to him, slow, fast, is present in only half of his published sonatas. In a quote by Sandra Mangson, we hear, "No doubt the ingenuously intertwining lines of the trio sonata and the fact that it prized fluent conversational interchange over unsettling drama and its inconvenient virtuosity contributed to its popularity with the professional and amateur musicians alike. Trio sonatas continue to be published in numbers well into the mid-18th century. In the end, however, the emerging classical style ousted it." So in other words, it was cool because the music was written intelligently, using musical conversation amongst the instruments, and really showed off their playing chops, which was a novel idea at the time. Here are some things that may help us understand how to recognize how the trio sonata is identified. As we listen to the excerpts from number 5 of Corelli's 12 Sonatas, Opus 3, Sonata in D minor, we will look for distinguishing elements. The standard form of church sonata is in the slow, fast form. In almost all of Corelli's church sonatas, the first movement is a slow introduction, in duple meter. In this example, we hear the 3 parts, 2 upper parts and a basso continuo. Here we can hear a chain of syncopated dissonances known as durezze e legatori, meaning hardness, or durations and ties or syncopations. In the second movement, we are given a fast fugue in duple meter. Listen to the imitative polyphonic dialogue. In the third movement, we have a triple meter movement. It's slow and imitative or homophonic in texture. In this example, we hear longer note values used at important cadences and dissonances built up and resolved. In the fourth movement, we hear a dance sfugato. It is in triple meter. This is the most common form in the fast tempo for the fourth movement. Listen again to the imitation and sequences used. Well, folks, that's the trio sonata. It's a mid-Baroque instrumental genre developed from the canzone genre in Italy, refined by Corelli and loved by all, using 3 contrapuntal lines consisting of 2 contrasting upper voices and a basso continuo, characterized by a chamber or da camera and church or chiesa category, both containing 4 movements in a slow, fast pattern, utilizing imitation, sequence, fugal elements, and time signature changes for identifying contents. Thank you for listening.